Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 154. Are you an optimistic introvert? We're in an age of toxic positivity, of faking it till you make it on social media, coupled with on-demand global news and the bombardment of data that comes at us daily. So finding equilibrium can be challenging. Yet there's probably never been as important a time to look at how to achieve a state of balance between the ever-present opposing forces and actions surrounding us. In this episode, I'm pondering how our lives as introverts might be if we started each day in positive reflection, or at least in a non-negative one. For instance, you know that I refer to Melody Beattie's wonderful book Journey to the Heart quite often, and I happened to be discussing this episode with one of my accountability buddies on January the 16th. Now, that happens to be the third Monday in January, which was coined as Blue Monday by psychologist Dr. Cliff Arnall, and it's said to be the most depressing day of the year. According to Arnall, this is due to the average time for New Year's resolutions to fail, the bad weather, debt, the time since Christmas, and motivational levels. Yay! I get some of that because I'm a sad sufferer myself, and I've long since stopped making New Year's resolutions, as you'll have heard about in previous episodes. And I certainly don't get into debt over the Christmas period. We prefer memories to things these days. Anyway, that got me thinking, is there a happiest day of the year? And I'm delighted to report that yes, there is. It's June the 20th, and the research behind that date shows that it's down to the lighter evenings, the prospect of holidays, and memories of childhood summers. So at least we have that to look forward to. But I'm not prepared to wait that long. I don't know about you. I flipped open Beattie's book to the page that held January the 16th and read this. January the 16th. See how happy you are. It starts, and I quote, "Most of us have active imaginations. We have the power to visualize, to create in our minds what we cannot yet see with our eyes. The problem is that many of us use this power to visualize events that we'd rather not see." The short prose at the end reads, "See yourself doing all the things you'd like to do. Take the time to use your creative power of visualization to create the life you'd like. But above all, take the time to see yourself happy." Thank you, Melody. I accept your invitation and am choosing to start my day with a positive reflection, meditation, or action. And that may be something as simple as a smile. At my age, I have a lot to smile about. For starters, I woke up. Sadly, not all of my friends manage that anymore. I have all of the basics I need, friends I can really be myself with, and work that fulfills me. I consider myself to be very fortunate. And I'm an optimist. One of my personal values is optimism, and I don't believe I could continue on with my mission to shift the extroversion bias without that optimism. But it's not blind optimism, because that's self-deception and delusion. It's realistic and, to some degree, hopeful optimism. After all, I'm an ex-engineer and project planner who anticipates and mitigates risk. And it's that realistic, hopeful optimism that gives me the courage to explore possibilities and push on where others just see barriers. I found this definition in Psychology Today, and it pretty much sums up how I am. Hopeful optimism involves a process of anticipating positive circumstances and improved outcomes. Science shows that imagining the future in such ways can help promote human flourishing, sustaining us through challenges. How perfect is that? Let's get a few things clear though before we go any further. I see a link between blind or forced optimism and toxic positivity, because in order to only see the upside, it often involves us avoiding, suppressing or rejecting negative emotion and or experiences. It's back to that equilibrium I mentioned earlier. We need to feel all of the feels, because whilst hopeful optimism can promote human flourishing, denying negative feelings, especially in the long term, can prevent people from processing their emotions and overcoming their distress. So how easy is it to be realistically optimistic? Not that easy, it would seem. You only have to watch some of the news on TV, listen to a news broadcast on the radio, or read a newspaper to know that we are really surrounded by a negative bias. This negative bias is part of our evolution and therefore our human conditioning, and it stems from when our lives depended on us noticing and acting upon threat and danger. It's the brain's way of keeping us safe. I talked about overcoming our negativity bias way back in episode 37, and it does no harm to revisit these things, especially in the gloom of January here in the Northern Hemisphere. The conditioning is the very thing that we're going to have to overcome if we're going to be more optimistic. And it's made harder by the apparent 74 gigabytes, 74 gigabytes of data that scientists have found an average person today can process in one day. And guess what? Much of that 74 gigabytes is alarmist, catastrophized clickbait. What to do then? One of the things I've done is subscribe to positive news so that I get to see some of the good news stories that matter. I've also started to use the hide all from option on some people's posts or comments on social media. I've been very deliberate about distancing myself from toxic people in my life, and doing the same on social media is very empowering. I'm not denying them their voice or opinion. I'm just choosing not to hear or see it. It might also be time to engage in learned optimism. Yep, that's a thing, and it's a concept from positive psychology, and you know what a fan I am of that. The good news is that according to Seligman, the father of positive psychology, learned optimism helps us to change our attitude and behaviours by recognising and challenging our negative self-talk. That's one of the reasons I created my Flip Your Limiting Beliefs course. Learned optimism is the opposite of learned helplessness, which is where individuals believe they are incapable of changing their circumstances. Those who persistently demonstrate learned helplessness, the pessimistic, are those I hide all from, as I don't have the bandwidth to help those who aren't prepared to help themselves. One phrase of Seligman's that really stuck with me is, life inflicts the same setbacks and tragedies on the optimist as on the pessimist, but the optimist weathers them better. So there's something about resilience there as well. And this points to some of the benefits of choosing optimism, and there are many. The foundations of developing a more optimistic outlook is to tackle the 3 cognitive distortions, which are personalisation, the extent to which we see failure and setbacks as our own fault; pervasiveness, the extent to which an undesirable outcome will impact all areas of our life; and permanence, the extent to which we believe the impact of something is forever. Those of you who remember me talking about Mick Cope's fantasy ladder will recognise these distortions, albeit under different labels. And remember, at the top of his fantasy ladder, you can either go through doubt to demon or through delusion to demigod status. Neither is helpful, and getting back to the reality of the situation is where we can build productively from. If you're interested in tapping into your inner optimist, try this exercise from the positive psychology people. Firstly, allow yourself to wallow a little and take a pessimistic approach. What were some of the things that annoyed you this week? What difficulties did you face at work? Don't gloss over it, really feel into it. Those are usually pretty easy to recall. It's back to our negativity bias. We tend to remember those. And what does that say about us? Once we've wallowed a little, move into an optimistic mindset. What were some of the things that made you feel happy, excited, or joyful? What is one thing that made you proud of yourself? And yes, it's perfectly okay to feel proud of yourself. For some of us, those are more difficult. So remember, you can always refer back to your daily gratitude reflections or journal to help with this. Finally, they suggest that you evaluate your experience by reflecting on how it felt to embody your optimistic mindset. What did you notice? How could you use your insights from this exercise in your daily life? This is a great exercise that I strongly suggest you do regularly. Here's some of what I've noticed since I started. I feel lighter, more able, more energized, more empowered, and ready to take action from that optimistic mindset. I found it easier to get into flow in that mindset. And I enjoyed what I was doing more, even some of the more mindless activities. And so here are some of my commitments. Beware of the cognitive distortions. They are not my friend, and yet my inner critic Gladys knows them well and invites them to tea quite often. Secondly, continue with my daily gratitude practice. I happen to do mine at the end of the day, but it's just as powerful at the beginning. And number 3, stop watching clickbait, catastrophized so-called news. I'll also start my day with a mindful reflection, and Melody Beattie's Journey from the Heart is as good a place to start as any. So, what are your thoughts? Are you tempted to adopt a more optimistic mindset? If so, make sure it's hopeful, realistic, and action-oriented. Mindset alone will not create the future you desire. You need to take action. I also encourage you to think about how it will benefit you. There are so many benefits, including health and well-being. So frankly, you have nothing to lose. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.